Fabricamos talento. Fabricamos innovación. Y, cómo no, sostenibilidad. Fabricamos una nueva economía. Y un mundo nuevo, en 3D, por supuesto. Pero sobre todo, fabricamos futuro. Y es que fabricamos empleo para más de 137.000 trabajadores. Fabricamos oportunidades globales de negocio en un espacio de más de 10 millones de metros cuadrados. Y fabricamos servicios de vanguardia y ventajas competitivas para más de 175 empresas. Consorcio de la Zona Franca. Fabricamos oportunidades para tu futuro.
Welcome to BFUTURE, the factory that develops talent, technology, innovation, and of course in the heart of Barcelona. After all, BFUTURE is consolidating Barcelona as a European capital of development for Industry 4.0, for digitalization, for transformation, creating 1,500 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect jobs in the city, close to the metro, the harbour and the airport. And promoted by the Consorcio de la Zona Franca de Barcelona.
Now it's the time of changes. Now is the time to move on. This is the time for solutions. Feel the motion. BNEW is born. BNEW none of you. Now I'm connected to you. BNEW none of you. BNEW will do it for you. This is the time for solutions. BNEW is for you.
Buenos días y bienvenidos a la tercera edición del BNEW. Seguimos impulsando esta nueva economía y durante esta semana Barcelona se convierte en la capital mundial de la nueva economía. Bien, nosotros lo hacemos de la mano del Consorcio de la Zona Franca de Barcelona, que ha sabido entender mejor que nadie lo que es el mundo actualmente, más pequeño, más global y más interconectado. Y todo ello lo hacemos desde el BFUTURE Barcelona, uno de los principales nodos de la industria 4.0 del sur de Europa y también está impulsado por el Consorcio de la Zona Franca de Barcelona. Bien, nosotros ahora mismo estamos en el plató Invest porque BNEW tiene 7 canales y este es el más internacional. Hablaremos de las inversiones, dónde está el foco ahora mismo de las grandes oportunidades empresariales. Y es un canal, como decía, internacional por muchas razones. Cuenta con una presencia de más de 150 países representados con todos los speakers que vendrán. 47% de presencia internacional y a lo largo de todos los continentes. Bien, nosotros ahora sí abriremos este primer panel del día. Dejar que ya os avance que incluso siendo un canal Invest internacional, este año se nota que las restricciones de la pandemia ya están eliminadas prácticamente y por lo tanto, ya veis, este plató que luce con todos los speakers en directo en formato presencial desde Barcelona para el mundo. Bien, este BFUTURE of Trade es el primer panel, tratará sobre las nuevas tendencias y las nuevas oportunidades, este futuro internacional que pasará a componentes que nos vienen desde Medio Oriente, Sudamérica, Centroamérica y Estados Unidos. Y todo ello ahora Courtney, que es nuestra moderadora, os los presentará, pero primero presentaremos a Courtney Finger. Good morning, Courtney. Thank you so much to join us today. Courtney Finger is Editor-in-Chief of Investment Monitor, a digital publication focused on foreign direct investment with its part of UK-based business intelligence provide. And before launching Investment Monitor in 2020, she worked 15 years the Financial Times. Wow, good job, Courtney. Well, thank you so much, and all yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and most of all, thank you to the organizers for having me back another year to lead some sessions as part of the Be Invest track of this fantastic event, and it's really great to have more in-person participants this year and a whole panel in person, which is quite a treat. Now, although this is the investment track of the program, we're going to start things off by talking about trade. And that is, of course, because trade and investment are intrinsically linked. They're a bit of an unholy alliance at times. But if we're going to understand foreign direct investment flows, we need to understand trade flows. And most certainly, if we're going to understand where free zones are at this moment in time and where they're headed, we have to unpack what's happening in the world of trade, and it's a lot. Now I'll present to you the speakers that are going to help us make some sense of this very volatile moment in international trade. They are next to me, Juan Pablo Rivera, CEO of Bogota Free Zone. Welcome to you. Shannon Furra, a partner of Page Furra and also vice chair of the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones, joining us from the United States. Carlos Wong, general director of Coil Free Zone in Costa Rica. And Mohsen Ahmed Alawadi, CEO of Logistics District and Dubai South, joining us from the UAE. Welcome to all of you. Now, Shannon, we'll start with you, hoping that you can help make some sense of what's happening right now in the world. Now, we're seeing massive supply chain disruptions, a great refiguration. Help us put some of these puzzle pieces together and tell us what's going on.
Sure, and thank you, Courtney, and thank you, everyone, and happy to be here. First, I guess the place to really start is talking about global trade developments and what's really impacting those global patterns that you're talking about. Certainly, we're seeing this shift away from China, which is continuing, if not accelerating. The U.S. Was the initial driver with this, with the Section 301 unfair trade practices involving intellectual property, theft and misappropriation, allegations and findings. And that really has now expanded to all aspects of China trade, with other countries that are now moving on board and carefully scrutinizing the relationships that they have with China and with their supply chains. We also have expanded concerns over civil-military fusion and the use of technology and products to further military purpose. And a good example of that would be the Huawei situation that we've heard so much about. The biggest probably unknown, though, is the forced labor consideration. And as we would say in the United States, that really is the wild card, because that's not just a US-centric issue that's a concern, but it really is a global issue that's taking on greater prevalence. And certainly, we just had the most recent UN report, which was issued by the Commission on Human Rights, which also talked about the concerns over forced labor and issues related to that are impacting the global environment. And, you know, based on that report, there was really a concern and strong statements in that report indicating that this could be considered international crime. So people are really sitting back and taking another look at that, which then, of course, ultimately affects the supply chain. We also have companies that, in terms of looking at the forced labor dynamic, really are looking how to be accountable to their shareholders. They're looking how to be accountable to the NGOs and also to their own governments where this is concerned. And recognize that I think one of the biggest challenges with the forced labor issue is that it's not just direct sourcing that's at risk, but it's really labor and materials and components which are at risk as well. And there are further aspects to that which are talking about more of the wherever produced dynamic. So what that means is if there's a nexus to forced labor, whether it's labor shifts or materials, then certainly that's going to impact that as well. Another consideration that's equally important is certainly the Russia consideration and the shutdown of business in and out of Russia. You have wholesale abandonment by some companies, by some countries in light of the Ukraine invasion. We have an unprecedented global effort to isolate Russia and its access to technology and goods, and we're seeing that really that impact is starting to grow. It started out a little slowly, but it started to grow. And based on recent events, we're certainly not seeing that turn itself around. And I think it's going to continue to be a major impact. Even if Russia were to pull back, you're not going to see other countries start to abandon the stance that they've taken. And frankly, we don't expect to see Russia pulling back based on recent events, even as soon as this week. Going back to the forced labor issue, the other thing that's important about the forced labor issue is that it really isn't a China-specific issue. It really is a global issue that has taken on greater significance. And I think you're starting to see companies start to step back and look at their corporate social responsibility practices and the issues that they need to realign and relook at what their compliance practices are and their policies related to that. The other thing is, Courtney, you mentioned, was the supply chain shortage issue. And that's something, whether it's chips or lithium or rare earth minerals or things of that nature, the ability to transport, deliver. We talked about the lack of chassis and how that's interrupted the supply chain. Those are all issues that are causing companies to step back and relook at their supply chain and leading to this reconfiguration that you mentioned. So then the question becomes, what are the implications from this? And I think the implications are you're going to continue to see reshoring and or nearshoring efforts. That's a big discussion and always an important topic. You're going to see companies, and we're already seeing it, frankly, companies starting to duplicate supply chains and look at how to do that, because they've recognized that we can no longer have a single source of supply for many of the things that we need, whether it's at the material level, the good level, or the component level. The challenge, though, with that is there are some items which certainly are not lending themselves to a duplicate supply chain. Mm-hmm. So the question becomes, where does that where do those goods come from? Where do those materials come from? And that's presenting a huge challenge for companies. And I think the last key point, which my colleagues I know are going to talk about, is the issue of companies looking and reestablishing friendships or creating new partnerships. And I think you're seeing, again, companies holistically taking a step back in their supply chains and looking at where they can either garner new partnerships, whether it's from North America to Latin America, or whether it's from North America over to Europe, whatever the case may be, they're looking at other opportunities and other investment opportunities and other ways in which to create benefits within programs like the Free Zone program or the Foreign Trade Zone program to draw companies in to try to help that supply chain disruption.
Thanks very much, Shannon. And because the forced labor issue is so significant, can you tell us very briefly about the Forced Labor Act and what it means and what its implications are?
Sure. And so the Forced Labor Act was something that was passed in the U.S. that went into effect on June 21st of this year. And it was something that went into effect immediately. And the issue really was trying to bear down on the situation that the focus was originally on the China situation with the Xinjiang region of China and the human rights issues that were there. And you've seen that take on a greater significance, and the issue has blown past China into other areas of the world and other commodities and other industries, and looking really at forced labor across the board. So whether it's child labor, or other dynamics such as that, it's really taking a step and looking at that and making sure that in your supply chain you have a clean supply chain and you have nothing that is derived from any type of forced labor consideration. And it's really caused companies to take a step back because it's forcing them to go all the way back to the very beginning of the supply chain. And frankly, in some cases, they may not have that information. And you have boots on the ground in other countries at trying to look at, trying to establish, was there forced labor involved in this? And from the U.S. perspective, at least importing into the U.S., there is information that U.S. Customs has put out and is reviewing their the intelligence that they have. And companies, unless they can prove otherwise, companies are in a position of having to defend and provide documentation to support why there was no forced labor in a supply chain if that is an allegation that's pursued.
So probably not worth taking the risk, especially.
That's
in such
exactly
enforcement.
right. That's exactly correct. And it's even if you have the ability to overcome the presumption, the difficulty with that is the fact that you have to go through all the time and effort to try to do that, and companies trying to pull their supply chain information together is proving to be very difficult.
Thank you very much. And I want to turn to you, Mohsen, about the supply chain shortages, and all of these disruptions have a huge impact, obviously, on e-commerce. So I wonder if you can tell us how you see that and how these changes, disruptions, reconfigurations impact a zone like yours.
Thank you all, and thanks for being here with the organizer. I mean, I think one of the things that happened during the pandemic was the supply chain was really tested. I always go around in our supply chain community and tell them that maybe 2021 was the supply chain revolution as a year that they should mark. Because it goes back to what Shannon was mentioning. Companies really looked at their supply chain in terms of the risk assessment on the supply chain. Traditionally, manufacturing was maybe one single source. If you look at any textbook matter of supply chain, they would tell you it's a risk, but yet the companies on the execution, they were still sourcing from one manufacturing. Now, there's a whole rethinking of that. A good example is if you look at what Apple announced. So they've shifted some of their manufacturing out of China to go into India. Now, this takes time. India, maybe as a country, was already getting prepared with investing in the sort of the ecosystem that enabled Apple to make that quick decision during the pandemic. And I think just a couple of weeks ago, even they extended that in sort of their production further in India, and they also announced a few other Asian countries that would take away a big chunk of the manufacturing out of it. Now, they are not alone. I don't think that as a company is alone. There are a number of other companies who are doing this at this moment, who are rethinking about the supply chain, and that's maybe the role of all the industrial parks globally that can look at it. Now, going back to the sort of the e-commerce side of the business, it's seen a phenomenon growth. If you look at the FDI index, the number one company there that's acquired to 1% of the global FDI is Amazon. And predominantly has been sort of in developing their distribution, because this is the growth, and of course the digital side with the data center. We saw a lot of challenges on the physical logistics side of it, when it came to the air freight, when it came to the sort of the sea freight. The rates were, I mean, if you look at just an example, the average rate from Shanghai to Los Angeles was about $10,000. Okay, luckily last week the indicator came down. It's gone down to almost about $3,000. So there is a bit of that. The capacity is coming back. The market is getting to it took a while, but things seem to be those high rates were not sustainable from a trade perspective, especially if there's a cross-border trading, things like e-commerce. On the airline, I think a lot of airline we saw a very quick response of changing from passenger to cargo. In fact, my flight here, I was talking to the flight attendant, and I said, "So what you guys were doing? You're a passenger." He said, they were transferred serving the cargo planes. So the same people, and that was a quick thinking by major airlines to shift. In fact, Emirates Airline at the moment they've converted about 11 of their passengers to cargo because there's a huge demand for it. I think that's across the globe where things. Near sourcing on a supply chain seems to be the sort of the new trend. We saw this many years ago with the flat screen when Mexico was becoming sort of the main supplier of flat screen into the US. But I think today we're going to see a lot more and more. And particularly, I think one of the things that's good about one of the sessions we have here is the Mediterranean versus Africa here. Africa would probably be the major the player in terms of coming into the manufacturing and sourcing of material.
And where is Dubai in all of this? I guess in particular vis-a-vis Africa, Dubai probably has a role to play as an entryway, a transit point. How have all these global changes left Dubai?
I think one of the, I mean, it depends on how you look at the globe. It's still, but I think our location, we've been blessed, where we are sort of right in the middle between Asia, Europe, and Africa. So traditionally, there's been quite a lot of trade going on. If you look at India, we probably one of the best connectivity as a country to India, farther than any other country, and that's where probably the manufacturing, especially in the technology sector, where majority of the FDIs are on a global scale is happening. Africa, we have a very good relationship on Africa, and particularly, of course, to the east coast of Africa, which has the highest connectivity. If you look at today on the aviation side, we're serving about plus 240 cities out of just Dubai in there. And if you look at that on sort of on the seaport at Jebel Ali, we're doing about 140 different calls of a city with 80 weekly calls of ships. These are numbers that is enabling us on our position. And I think today, if you see all the trade agreements that we're having at UAE level with African countries, it's phenomenal. As Dubai South, as sort of our logistics, we're working very closely with the government of Ghana to see how we can create a land bridge that then Ghana can create that one to South America. So it's a different route than I think the sort of the north that maybe China now. Now we are going through via Africa to the south, I guess, of the hemisphere.
Thank you very much. And shift our attention a little bit to Latin America, which has an interesting role to play also in terms of changing relationships between the U.S., China. I'll start with Carlos. Where is a zone like COIL in the midst of these changes? And Shannon mentioned about new partnerships, new trading relationships. Is that something that's front of mind for you?
Thank you, Courtney. A pleasure to be here, and thank you to the organization of the BNEW event and Consorcio de Barcelona for this very nice event. For Costa Rica, and I think that for COIL Frisson, this process has been a land of opportunity. I will start by putting maybe some elements on how that created a very interesting opportunity. First of all, during the pandemic, we've all been talking about the disruption of the supply chain. That is something that happened, it was a reality. But that reality affected principally the relationship between East and West. When we were talking about all the problems in China in terms of the supply chain, then all the companies were affected. So as several of you have mentioned, all the supply chain has been affected, and the companies reacted by looking to new places where to locate, where to source their products. But also, not only the companies reacted, but the governments. Particularly the United States government had taken a lot of actions during the last few years that are changing the way that the companies can supply chain. Elements like, for example, the first notions of nearshoring, who started President Biden in talking about the possibility that the US companies start sourcing near to the United States, was a very important element. But recent actions like the Chips and Science Act on August 9 of this year are creating opportunities for the US companies to do not only further research in the basically development of semiconductors, but also looking for alternatives for them to put operations near shore. So that is helping the processes. In the case of Costa Rica, Intel recently opened a new fab in Costa Rica that it will be increasing their job generations all the way up to 10,000 people in Costa Rica within the next few years. So those elements are basically indicating that the governments are reacting not only from a production point of view, from a supply chain point of view, but also from a political arena. Just recently, also Costa Rica, Panama, and Dominican Republic and United States started the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, which is an act that is looking to support the countries that are democracies in the region and are helping these countries to develop new relationships with the United States, new supply chain relationships with the United States. And in that sense, Costa Rica is now in a position to become an important element in the supply chain, let's say north-south. So we're seeing a shift from east-west to a shift north-south and a stronger position. As a reflect of that in Costa Rica, during the pandemic, we saw in the free zones the most significant increments in terms of job generation. We were basically the sole source of jobs in the private sector. In the case of coyote-free zone, we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year, and now we represent more than 22,000 employees in coyote-free zone. And during the last 3 years, we have seen the fastest growing rates in our free zone, particularly also in large projects. What we have seen is a significant change in the size and in the complexity of the projects coming to Costa Rica. So that is creating also significant challenges for our country in how we're going to address this growth. But as a matter of fact, we are now representing almost 2% of the Costa Rican GDP, just coyote-free zone. We're impacting our country with more than 55% of the total exports of the medical devices sector. This is a significant impact, with more than $2 billion being exported from our free zone just in medical devices. It's a primary free zone specialized in medical devices. So as you can see, this impact is based on the fact of business continuity that we have through the pandemic and all these elements. Costa Rica then represents a closer manufacturing point to the United States, with multiple ways to get into the United States by ocean cargo or by air. Because we're so close, then the medical devices can reach the United States market easily, instead of having to take, let's say, a big ocean cargo from Asia into Costa Rica, so that into the United States. So that is creating a very important link. And so that mix of problems in the world, because of the ocean cargo cost, because of the scarcity of several components, like steel now because of the Ukraine. So that is creating these opportunities for the countries that are close to the United States. And in that sense, Costa Rica and coyote-free zone are an important point and an opportunity in that sense.
Thank you. And the relationship with the U.S. will always be preeminent based on geography, but is there much focus on diversifying? And, you know, Asia, I suppose, is a competitor in some ways for many of the activities that you carry out, but is there scope for partnership as well?
Indeed. Indeed, that's one of the big benefits that we're seeing, which is basically a combination not only of an economic factor, but also it is promoted in the political arena by the actions that the U.S. government is taking. So the fact that we are a sustainable democracy, that we have a very sustained business environment during the last 100 years, is creating opportunities and conditions for the U.S. companies primarily, and also from companies from Europe to settle in Costa Rica to export back to the United States market. So that element is interlinked and creating a closer manufacturing position, instead of going to the other side of the ocean and creating longer delivery times, more unstable conditions, and also much more expensive conditions. So that is a unique situation, and I think that we're facing what we would call very good times for the free zones in Costa Rica.
Thank you. Very much surfing that nearshoring wave, aren't you?
I hope so.
Juan Pablo, how do you see the impact on South America, Colombia, and your zone in particular? How are you adapting to all of these changes?
Well, Carney, as we already said, I'm very grateful for being here today with you in this panel. And I would say, Carney, that first of all, Colombia is a country with a lot of trade agreements. We have trade agreements with a lot of countries, which gives us an opportunity to get into something like 1,500 million inhabitants around the world, and gives the opportunity to get access to those countries. And also, some of them are with the US, with the regional countries, with the European countries, particularly with Europe. We have a trade agreement. And that gave us a lot of opportunities in order to react to the pandemic and to all this situation that we have lived in the past years. Particularly we have seen how the economy has reacted very fast in Colombia. We have been one of the economies that have grown in a greater way in the last 2 years. Particularly this year, our exports are growing 71%, comparing with the export last year. That's been represented particularly on the exports on oil and gas and the extractive products, taking in account the opportunity of these problems that we're having around the world, you know, with the shortage of oil and coal, and we're one of the coal bigger exporters in the world, and that gives us an opportunity there. Also, agroindustry is one of the business that has been growing more in Colombia, around 12%. Manufacture, also an industry, is growing around 11%, and food and beverages 33%. And taking also in account that services is another sector that is very important in Colombia. We're exporting and providing a lot of services to the region, taking in account the opportunity that we have on the position of Colombia against, you know, the U.S. and the other countries on the scheduled times and things like that. In despite of the inflation that is taking, let's say, all around the world, particularly in Colombia, we have been with an inflation of about a 10% rate, and that has given us some troubles with the central bank, as is happening all around in the US, the Fed and the European Central Bank. The interest rate has raised from 4% to 10% in 6 months in order, you know, to take the inflation down. But we believe that that's something that for the next year is going to be more comprehensive to all of us, and see how we can deal in order to get it short and slow. And with that global context, we believe that in Colombia we have a free trade zone regime that has been for many years, since year 58. At the moment, we have 124 free trade zones in operation. And all of them are working in different sectors: in logistics, health, BPOs, agribusiness, e-commerce, digitalization. And that gives many opportunities for companies to establish in Colombia through the free trade zone regime. Particularly in Colombia, we have this special advantage on the carbon footprint, because our energy grid is coming from 70% of hydro generation, and 15% in addition are coming from solar energy, photovoltaic, and eolic sources. So that gives us a great opportunity for companies that need a lot of power energy to deliver their services and processes, like, for example, data centers. That's one of the biggest opportunities that we have had in Colombia, particularly in our free zone in Bogota. Actually, we have 4 data centers already in operation, and there are 3 more under construction. 2 of them are hyperscales, and 1 is a data center edge that provides, you know, the close services to the companies that needs to provide streamings and things like that to their clients close in the region. And I believe that that's one of the sectors that gives a lot of opportunities, and we expect to continue growing in that particular data center hub in Colombia. Also, this pandemic has given us, as I believe that to all of us, great concerns on ESG concerns or aspects. In our free trade zone, we have been since 2012 been part of the Global Compact and reporting our green report to the United Nations since then. And actually, we're trying to become part of the UNIDO certification of eco parks, in which we already did our first analysis, and we are complying with 67% of the requirements, and we expect to have in the next 2 or 3 years comply with the 90% of the requirements, so that we can become part of this ecosystem that is very important in order to attract the new investments. Particularly in 2019, we were recognized by the FDI magazine as the best free trade zone in Americas and the 4th in the world due to all these type of activities that we do with that orientation to the ESG concern. We have a university within the free zone in which are studying 1,500 people permanently. We have already graduated more than 2,000 people in the last 5 years in our university. We're very happy with that. We work on campaigns to deliver positions and work campaigns for disabled, for people that is returning from to the social life, let's say, from the difficulties that we have had for the last years in Colombia, that fortunately we are now in a peace process that has been very important for us. Also, we work on environment, taking a lot of care with the treatment of the water, recycling the solid waste and things like that, that give us all these type of opportunities to comply with this type of certification. So we believe that in Colombia, in the free trade zone regime, there is a lot of opportunities. As I mentioned, 124 free zones, expecting all those nearshore companies that are willing to be part of their supplies close to their clients, and for sure Colombia will be one of those countries that will attract these new investments in the region.
Thank you very much. It's useful that you mention a few times the ESG, because this is the umbrella under which sits the issues like forced labor, net zero, and many things that are now kind of boardroom agendas and that are impacting how companies set up production facilities and run their supply chains. We're coming a little close to time, but I want to throw another question to Shannon, which is that given the significance of the U.S. as a trade partner in any number of countries, but also of zones like Carla's, like Juan Pablo's, the U.S. having midterm elections coming up, the political scene in the U.S. is very polarized and a little bit volatile. What kind of changes would you anticipate in terms of the U.S.'s stance towards China and many of the issues that we're talking about, if there are major changes, at least in Congress, and then following that potential presidential administration?
Sure, and that's a great question. I had to smile at it's a little volatile.
Understatement.
Maybe a level. No, it is a great question. I think one of the things with the U.S., and it's a question that we're asked on a constant basis, particularly when you're traveling internationally, is, with the Trump administration vacating and the Biden administration coming in, with respect to China, there was a thought that suddenly everything was going to be pulled back, right? So all the actions that were taken during the Trump administration were going to be pulled back, and it was going to be more of a moderate approach. And what's been interesting is you haven't seen that. In fact, it's only grown. And there certainly in the US, there have been further actions that we've kind of mentioned briefly, but not just with respect to forced labor, but certainly with, we mentioned other sanctions, embargoes, and other things that the administration, and particularly the US Trade Representative, has held fast on. So I think you do have midterms coming up. It definitely is a polarizing environment right now. And we're hearing indications that former administrations are potentially going to be running again when you come down for that particular run. But I think you're not going to see a big shift. I think everything is going to stay status quo as it is. If not, you're going to see more, a little bit more of the enforcement-minded mentality, regardless of which administration rolls in and regardless of which way the midterm elections go. One of the reasons is I also think that people are afraid, frankly, from a political perspective. They're very afraid to pull back and ease up actions on China or Russia or any other type regime where we're trying to take a stance. So I don't think you're going to see big changes with the midterms coming through.
It seems that the hawkishness towards China is maybe one of the few areas of agreement across the political spectrum in the U.S. So that relationship between these two superpowers will continue to dominate the world of trade and investment and geopolitics. Thank you for shedding some light on that. We are wrapping up here now. I wish we could talk more. There's a lot more I'd like to ask all of you, but thank you very much for being here in person and traveling here and sharing your insights. Thank you very much to our audience for tuning in, and now we will hand back over to our presenter.
Thank you, Courtney. Panels like this are always enriching, and help us to have a more global and a specific vision on Invest. Thank you to our experts on this first panel. Thank you, Corner. Nosotros haremos una breve pausa y volveremos después para seguir hablando de inversiones. Precisamente ahora nos hemos centrado en una visión más global, ¿no? Medio Oriente, Sudamérica, Centroamérica. Hemos hablado, por ejemplo, de Colombia, ¿no? Y las oportunidades en materia agroalimentaria y también cómo estas cadenas de suministro se adaptan a una crisis global cambiante de un día para otro. Bien, pues después, dentro de América, nos centraremos en un mercado curioso, emergente, el del Caribe. Breve pausa y nos vemos desde el plató Invest, desde este BFUTURE del Consorci de la Zona Franca de Barcelona. Muchas gracias.
Fabricamos talento, fabricamos innovación y, cómo no, sostenibilidad. Fabricamos una nueva economía y un mundo nuevo, en 3D, por supuesto. Pero sobre todo, fabricamos futuro. Y es que fabricamos empleo para más de 137.000 trabajadores. Fabricamos oportunidades globales de negocio en un espacio de más de 10 millones de metros cuadrados. Y fabricamos servicios de vanguardia y ventajas competitivas para más de 175 empresas. Consorci de la Zona Franca. Fabricamos oportunidades para tu futuro.
Welcome to BFUTURE, the factory that develops talent, technology, innovation, and of course in the heart of Barcelona. After all, BFUTURE is consolidating Barcelona as a European capital of development for Industry 4.0, for digitalization, for transformation, creating 1,500 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect jobs in the city, close to the metro, the harbour and the airport. And promoted by the Consorci de la Zona Franca de Barcelona.